Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from the LEDS Global Partnership. My name is Scott Muller, and I represent the working group on subnational integration. Today we are honored to have Dr. Michael Mulcahy. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Sector Development Agency of GreenCape in the Western Cape Province of South Africa. And he's going to be sharing with us this most recent comprehensive case study from the LEDS Global Partnership on how their nonprofit organization GreenCape, which was created by the provincial government, how they have been able to work so successfully across local and national governments and with the private sector and academia to really launch significant green industries, generate important investments, and create thousands of jobs in the green economy in the Western Cape Province. This case study is currently available on the LEDGPorg website, and we'll go ahead and post it on the side in the notes in the chat feature here in the matrix. Now, some quick housekeeping items. This is your options for listening by telephone or computer. Most importantly here is the questions. On your face, on your GoToWebinar interface on the side, there's a questions tab. Please go ahead while Mike is presenting their work. If you just enter your questions, these will be logged, and at the end they will frame our discussion, and we will answer all those questions. Unfortunately, Mr. Charles Akurugu from Ghana could not be with us today, but I'll go ahead and facilitate the question and answer session. When Michael finishes his remarks and we've attended to all the questions and discussion, we're going to take a short survey, so we'd appreciate if you could stay on for the quick survey. Quickly here as a refresher on the Subnational Integration Working Group. The group's been around for over 3 years now and has grown to well over 600 members from individuals and governments, international government organizations and NGOs, and is really focused on driving a better understanding about the integration of low-emission development strategies between national and subnational governments, and unlocking those synergies when that collaboration is efficient. There's lots of reports that are written, case studies, training that's done, and a lot of that is available, again, at the LEDGP.org. The best way to do this is to join the LEDS Global Partnership if you're not a member yet, and those instructions are available at LEDGP.org. So with that, Michael, it is my honor to welcome you. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. The case study is, I think, one of the more comprehensive that we've ever published that really does give an insider's view to the creation of this sector development agency. So we're honored to have you here today and appreciate you taking the time. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. I'm just trying to share the screen here. That should take just a sec.
We can see it.
Perfect. Excellent. Thanks very much, Scott, and thanks very much to the LEDGP team, Anna and Charles, for helping put all of this together. As Charles said, my name's Mike. I run an organization called GreenCape, and we're based in Cape Town in the Western Cape of South Africa. It's been a really interesting process trying to think back and reflect on how we set up, what we did, what the lessons were, and how much of that is replicable or could be used by other entities in other regions. And it really has been quite a privilege to have spent some time thinking back and trying to distill a few of the lessons rather than it being sort of a bit of a random walk to end up where we are. So the structure of the presentation, I'm going to take you through a little bit about what GreenCape is about. I'll tell you a little bit about what we've achieved over the last 5.5 years as kind of hopefully a sweetener to give some indication maybe we are achieving a few things. And then I'll spend some time reflecting on how we established ourselves, what the structures were, and what some of the key lessons or the key insights that we've been able to pull out have been from the last couple of years. So in quite a high-level overview, GreenCape focuses on 3 major areas. It's energy, resources, and waste. Within each of those areas, we've got a couple of programs running. Within energy, there's a big focus on renewable energy, on energy efficiency, as mechanisms for the green economy in the region. In resources, we're really talking about land, so agriculture, and water. South Africa is generally a water-scarce country, and the Western Cape specifically is a semi-arid environment. So water management and water resources are really quite critical for climate mitigation into the future. I guess one last bit on water, lots of the models of climate change see the rain patterns in South Africa changing fairly drastically. We are a winter rainfall region, and basically there's a bunch of cold fronts that come past the tip of Africa, which is Cape Town. A lot of the climate change models have all those cold fronts pushing further south and basically missing South Africa. We also have a big focus on waste. This is really with municipalities and with private companies, looking at waste management, how you design appropriate waste management technologies. So we've done a lot of work on understanding the required legislation, understanding the required waste volumes, and have built a decision support tool for that. We've also piloted an industrial symbiosis program in South Africa, which is based on a United Kingdom model. And that's been very interesting to see how much economic opportunity can be unlocked while you're simultaneously solving some of these low emission development challenges. Supporting these things that GreenCape is doing, we've got a big focus around finance. We're also busy developing a special economic zone focused on manufacturing for green technology. And we've had a big focus on skills development. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, they're just sort of the high-level numbers. We've seen something in the region of 14 billion rand of investments that have been facilitated by GreenCape. That number's probably bumped up to about 17 over the last couple of months. We've got a team of about 40 staff. The typical profile is a master's degree or higher, and it's a wide range of skill sets. So maybe half the staff are engineers, electrical, mechanical, and chemical. The remaining half are typically finance or economics backgrounds. So it's quite a high level of technical competence that the staff have. And then the broad impact, those are the 2 things that we are really measured on by the provincial government, is around investments facilitated and local jobs created. And we've got some I think, pretty impressive numbers of what we've been able to achieve. So the next slide is, I'm just going to play this video and talk over it while it's playing. Make it a bit softer. Sorry. Get it there. So one of the big things that we realized sort of 5 years in is that there hasn't been a huge amount of sort of broader understanding of the impact of the green economy in the region. So we spoke to a few, I guess, marketing, branding, and investment promotion type of people, and the decision was to try and put together a bit of a video like this that shows the speed of the growth of the green economy, as well as some specific projects that we've been involved in. So if you look at the key on the left-hand side, those are kind of the big sectors that we've been working in. And each of those dots represent real projects that have been developed over the course of a few years of GreenCape's working. I think it's also a reasonable way of seeing the map of South Africa. That keeps stopping every time I every time I click. Anyway, so this is broadly the Western Cape, which is the region that we operate in. It's a subnational region within South Africa. South Africa has 9 sub-regions or provincial regions. The Western Cape is the region that we operate in, and you can see Cape Town at the bottom of the picture there, which is the major city. Maybe just very quickly some of the regional statistics. There's about 4 million people that live within the city of Cape Town, and then about 6 million that live within the region. So it's reasonably large by some of the city standards, and the city of Cape Town has been one of the sort of key drivers in trying to unlock opportunities in the green economy. I mean, as you can see, a bunch of the projects starting to go up, and you can start to see it. The work that we've done has been largely focused in the city of Cape Town, but then more and more in some of the smaller municipalities outside of the large metropolitan centres. I think you can also see, I guess, as the team started growing and as we started succeeding from a few of the early interventions that we ran, we got slightly larger budgets, which meant we could have slightly more staff, which meant that we could basically have a larger impact. I think some of the big insight from a video like this is the speed of the growth within the project year on year. And this maps really the full journey from GreenCape when we were established in 2010, right through to I think it ends in about January 2016. I should have made a few more notes to speak while the video was going. But I think you can really see across the different sectors more and more momentum building within the region, and I think it comes out in a few of the lessons that happen later on, that there really is momentum that starts to build as people understand the opportunity, and as more and more companies begin to get involved in progressing the green economy. Okay, I'll stop it just after this final map, where basically the conclusion is we've been involved in about 163 projects across the region over the last 6 years. So I think now the real focus is, okay, so we've achieved a couple of things. How did we set up, and how did we get this trajectory over the years? I've pulled this out, and it's a bit of an ugly slide, but it's actually the exact original slide that we used to present GreenCape as a proposal. We presented GreenCape as a proposal to 2 local, they're called ministers, but they're effectively part of the regional government. It was the regional Minister for Economic Development and the regional Minister for Environmental Affairs and Development Planning. And this was the proposal that we had put to them about justifying why and what an entity like GreenCape or a GreenTech SPV, some kind of special vehicle, what benefit that could have for the region. And we kind of focused that benefit in 4 main categories. Really around economic development and job creation, around networking, which is building a bit of an institutional understanding, building a space that companies have easy access to information. We looked at having a funding clearinghouse, which is really to bring stakeholders together, to be able to optimize the local content. And then I think one of the functions that we had, I guess, underestimated when we originally started was that lobbying function. And quite a lot of what GreenCape has ended up doing over the last 5 years is really helping regional governments and local governments, and to an extent national governments, understand that the rules and regulations that have been written are not necessarily written to support this movement towards the green economy, and to, I guess, fairly painstakingly and consistently help authorities work through the regulations and legislation that they have to see the impact on how it handicaps particularly low emission development projects, alternative waste management, embedded generation or small scale renewable energies, that a lot of the systems that were set up historically, often in the 1980s or 1970s, were just written without any of these new technologies taken into consideration. And if you spend some time to go to the spirit of what the legislation was trying to achieve, it's often been fairly, well, easy is probably the wrong word. It takes a long time, but it's almost non-contested that it will take you 6 months or 9 months to change portions of the legislation. But often you'll find that the officials, the bureaucrats, and technocrats support the changes. But someone has to basically do the work, and that I think is a lot of what GreenCape has done. That presentation that I've just shown you was made to those two ministers, and we'd also set up an advisory board structure, which we'll show you the structure in just a second. But I think one of the big insights from the setup was the advisory board structure had about 20, 25 extremely recognized names in planning in South Africa. So from environmental planning, infrastructure planning, roads, agriculture, energy, we tried to pull together, and academia, we tried to pull together basically 20 people that we knew would have a fairly divergent opinion on setting up an entity like GreenCape or what exactly the entity should do. But we managed to get that group of people to support the sentiment that something like this would be valuable. While that group would be impossible to agree on the specific priorities and the specific order of the interventions that an entity like that should do, basically because they all have different backgrounds and different interests, we were able to get a sufficient consensus that it was a sensible thing for the regional government to set up an entity with a range of possible tasks, and then that entity, through its planning and through its thinking, could be able to do some prioritization itself. A couple years after that was in 2010, a couple years after that, in 2012, the Western Cape government tried to expand its focus on the green economy and developed something that's called the Green Economy Strategic Framework. We were fairly involved in the authoring and the crafting of this strategic framework. But it was the first time that the regional government really put a policy position together on what it would like to do in support of the green economy in the region. And without going into all of the details, you can see from the slides that they identified a bunch of drivers, so areas that were identified as having high impacts for low emissions development, for the green economy, for green technology. And then they identified a bunch of things that they've called enablers. And the enablers are typically things that are within the regional authorities' mandate and power to have some impact over. So things like infrastructure, things like rules and regulations, things like how you structure finance. Those are the levers or the enablers that the local authorities and the regional authority has to try to influence these different sectors. So I've tried to put a bit of a map together of how this expansion has happened over the last couple of years. In 2011 and 2012, you can see that the big focuses were around energy and waste. In 2013, those focuses started to broaden out, more or less in line with this broadening strategy from the regional authority. 2014 and then 2015 were expanded even further and even further. I think some of the big insights from seeing a slide like this is, one of the lessons that we've had internally as well, is that when we started, we were really quite specifically focused. And even though that original sort of spider diagram that I showed you with all of the different possible areas that we could be working in, we really cherry-picked quite specific areas that we could succeed in, that we could build up some momentum, build up some track record, build up some credibility, and that really allowed us to start to expand over time. The speed of expansion is a little bit intimidating from a management perspective, really exciting from a team development perspective and from an opportunity perspective. So it's the big lesson I think that we've had is that what has made us successful in the initial years is an ability to focus and prioritize incredibly deliberately. And as we've moved forward, that's allowed us to build credibility. It's allowed us to build a track record, and it's allowed GreenCape to be seen as a successful delivery agency for a bunch of the interventions that the region is interested in doing. What it's meant is that in 2014, 2015, 2016, this year, is that we've had to really redouble our efforts on understanding focus, understanding prioritization, and understanding how we select opportunities. I think the case study goes into quite a lot of detail on the methodology that we use for that. But from a lessons perspective, I really can't emphasize enough the importance of focus and prioritization. There are so many different areas that you can intervene, and so many different possible projects that you could that are valuable to get involved with within a green economy or within a low emissions development space. That it's quite overwhelming, and if you haven't built an agreed ability to prioritize and an agreed ability to filter those opportunities, you can really end up charging around from one thing to the next thing to the next thing with very low impact or very small ability to actually close out on the work that you've been doing. So very quickly, this is the original structure and the current structure of how we've done a lot of the development planning at GreenCape. So the 2010 structure on the left-hand side, that's that joint ministerial advisory board that I was referencing earlier. It was co-chaired by the two local ministers for environmental affairs, development planning, and for economic development. There were then another 20 to 25 very recognized names within the green economy, within construction, within water management, within agriculture, that joined that board. They were pulled across academia, from industry, and from civil society. So from that larger group of 20, GreenCape established its specific board of directors. One of the requirements of our board of directors is that you have representation from academia, industry, and civil society. So currently we have no specific government representation on our board, but as our primary funder and primary shareholder, we have a lot of service level agreements with them on what work we will do. But the strategic planning for the entity or the organization is run by a combination of these three sources. This is broadly based on a model that was developed by Michael Porter. It's called a cluster development strategy, where you have these triple helix of government, academia, and business. We found it to be incredibly successful in balancing a few of the agendas and in being able to remain focused on economic opportunities through the industry leg, to really have some high level of focus on academic rigor to make sure that the work that you're doing is relevant. And then with civil society, we've included the WWF as part of our board, and I think that helps to manage some of the tensions of the environmental aspects and making sure that remains right at the forefront of the thinking. Then underneath that, we'd set up a range of subcommittees to help with specific project planning. As we've moved forward to 2016, the structure has changed very slightly, in that this Minister's Advisory Board has now become the Green Economy Steering Group, which is a group that is embedded within the bureaucratic structure of the regional authority. So the Green Economy Steering Group is made up of heads of department from off the top of my head, it's 6 or 7 departments: agriculture, environmental affairs, economic development, um, transport, public works, the office or the department of the premier, and I think, and the Department of Health. The Department of Health largely because they own and manage a very large fleet of buildings with lots of energy intensity. That group basically devolved from being a political structure chaired by 2 ministers to being a bureaucratic structure chaired by heads of department. From GreenCape's perspective, we had a slight adjustment in how we've approached problem solving and how we've approached the prioritization. And as you can imagine, broadening out from a focus that was quite dominated by utility scale renewable energy to including things like waste management, water, there are different skill sets that are required in solving and prioritizing each of those different projects. So the typical structure that we have now is we've got programs, resources, waste, and energy. And within those programs, we've got a team leader. And the responsibility of that team leader is to set up a steering committee to be able to prioritize which areas of intervention are the most important or the most appropriate. And we've called that basically industry dialogue. And it can be something as simple as going for coffees with very senior representatives of industry. It can be a lot more formal, where guys are invited on a quarterly basis to have a steering committee meeting or a strategic planning meeting. A lot of that depends on the industry, and a lot of that depends on the individual personalities of the program leaders. Every time that we try to do strategic prioritization, we systematically make sure that we've spoken to representatives, basically a minimum of 10 senior representatives that represent that industry or that sector. Then we have to speak to a couple of academics and a range from civil society as well. All of this is to advance the rigor of thought to make sure that our prioritization is done as accurately as possible. All of that then feeds up to the GreenCape Board of Directors, who help us then make decisions across different programs. So, as you can imagine, if you've got a water program, often and particularly with passionate staffers, they will believe that water is the most important relative to waste management, relative to energy, and that board of directors then helps us find a balance on where we focus our time and effort across those 3 different programs that we're currently running. So we're getting towards the end. I only have, I think, 10 slides, but this slide is really the attempt to identify the key factors for success that we've had. I think the first one there is access to industry. GreenCape has got about 650 member companies, ranging from international utilities right down to sort of startup enterprises. We try hard to communicate with our members fairly frequently. We don't charge membership fees. We don't try to make it exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. But we do want members that are actively participating in the sectors that they represent. So they must be buying or selling something in that sector to be considered a credible member. We've worked really hard on being impartial and being a quasi-political or an originally politically set up and funded entity. That comes with its own challenges. It's a deliberate choice to be impartial and to be data-driven, but it's proven to be very useful for us over time. It's also proven to be very useful in generating the types of relationships that we need with other government departments, with the national government, or with the local authority, that we've tried to stay quite far away from the regional or local politics. I think the next one is really similar. It's the credibility that comes with being data-driven and the credibility that comes with having a high level of expertise. There's a range of really very impressive people that work at GreenCape, and I think that being based in Cape Town and having 4 very good tertiary institutions to draw from, and this being a sector that there is a high level of passion and a high level of engagement, has meant that our ability to access very impressive expertise has been, well, we've been very lucky. We've looked across sectors, and I think this is almost a function of working across the 3 different programs and seeing how they are interdependent. So, I mean, a very quick example off the top of my head is that if you have a water shortage, energy is directly linked to technologies like desalination, or basically energy and water form 2 sides of a coin. If you've got enough energy, you don't have a water problem, and if you have enough water, you can really mitigate your energy problem. So trying to build a range of solutions that takes into consideration a number of the cross-sectoral challenges. Policy and regulation changes. Yeah, I guess I've written that the key factor there is ability. Sort of reconsidering that might just be determination. But once you start to build some credibility as a team, that you will keep going, and that if it's going to take 9 months, or it's going to take 14 months, or it's going to take a year and a half, that you have the appetite and the credibility to see those things through. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that if we start to talk about regulation changes now at a regional or a local government, everyone knows that we will have the appetite to see it through, which I think builds a lot of credibility, and yeah, it really helps for. You might end up over-investing in the first couple that you do, but it makes your life much easier going into the future. Legitimacy and mandate. These are really interesting because theoretically we don't really have a mandate, and we're an independent not-for-profit. So while I've put this under a key factor for success, I think a lot of the insights are that your legitimacy comes from your impartiality, from your expertise, and your mandate largely comes from the board of directors. And if you can make sure that your mandate is fairly tightly defined and that you are credible, you build yourself legitimacy and you build yourself a mandate. That comes, I guess, from impact orientation. The ability to succeed on a range of different time horizons is really one of the, I think probably one of the harder prioritizations that we do is, do you work on a project that will take 4 years but will have a massive impact? If that's the only project that you're working on, it's going to be really tough to maintain the momentum and maintain the credibility. But if you work on a range of smaller projects along the way, that you can succeed in these bite-sized chunks, it builds up a lot of momentum, and that builds up your legitimacy and builds up your credibility. Perhaps a very good example of this is one of the very first projects that we started was to try to set up a renewable energy technical training center at one of our local universities. That project took probably 2.5 to 3 years to finally see through. And it would have been on that map of projects as they were emerging. The insight there, though, is that while we were working on that and we knew it would take 2.5 or 3 years to execute on, we were also working on a bunch of much shorter-term interventions that allow you to maintain a lot of your credibility, a lot of your, I guess, currency, and a lot of your ability to be noticed by decision makers. And then the last bit, it's completely outside of our control, but we've enjoyed over the last 5 or 6 years in the Western Cape a high level of political stability. We're actually having local elections today as I'm speaking, but we've had the same regional political party. We've also had the same 2 members of the executive, the ministers. So those original same 2 ministers of economic development and environmental affairs, they're still the same 2 ministers 6 years later. We also have the same premier of the region, and almost unbelievably the same head of department within the Department of Economic Development and Tourism, which is our primary point of contact with the government. So there's been a very high level of stability, which is, I guess, allowed us to build up this credibility over time. And then we're just about finished. I think this is the last one. The lessons that are emerging right now for GreenCape, and it's our current challenges, I guess, is really around this focus and prioritization. And I think I assume that a lot of the audience that will listen to a webinar like this is already part of the converted and will have a good understanding that there is literally thousands of different avenues and thousands of different projects and thousands of different priorities that all simultaneously need to be done basically in order for the planet to have a chance of surviving. Speaking to the converted and speaking to how we've tried to do our prioritization is we acknowledge that we can't do everything. So in order to do what we can, you have to have a very specific methodology to find your priorities and then to focus on getting some things done. This comes to targeted problem definition and solving. We spend quite a large amount of time doing training with the staff on problem solving, problem definition. Can you design a mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive decision tree on how you solve problems and how you define a problem specifically? Because those are the first precursors to be able to start to succeed. I guess some of the tensions are around relevance and credibility. As an organization like GreenCape, the more we do and the more we succeed, the more we're asked to do, which is fantastic for relevance. But the more temptation there is to start to operate in sectors or spaces that are a little bit outside of your core competence. So making sure that you, within each of these decisions for work, to make sure that you're relevant, to make sure that your team has the relevant skills, and to make sure that you're the appropriate organization to be doing this. And then the last one, I think I've spoken about it almost to the point of exhaustion, but your credibility comes from being able to succeed and being consistent in your approach. That's the data-driven approach, it's the non-political approach, it's high level of rigor, high level of prioritization. So when you're, and a high level of determination to see results. And I think this is something that over the last 6 years has probably been the biggest change. I mean, I've been GreenCape right from the beginning when we made that those first presentations to the ministers. But this is the thing that I've observed as being the largest change, is all of a sudden we have credibility. It's impossible to know when it happened, but I think the consistent approach of working hard on each of these different programs has allowed us to all of a sudden have this credibility where we've built relationships with national stakeholders, we've built relationships with local stakeholders, with regional stakeholders, and we're now seen increasingly as a go-to point or a credible reference point for data-driven solutions in green economic development. This is just a quick look into the future. I think we have quite a lot of ambition to look at how we can take some of this work that we've been doing into other regions in South Africa. We've done a little bit of work outside of South Africa. Specifically, we've done some work in industrial symbiosis with a few other African countries. Then internationally, we are working quite, we're exploring relationships with the C40 Cities Network, which is basically trying to see what we can learn from other regions or other cities in addressing these low emission development or green economy objectives. And then the last bit for the international relations is we're the first African member of something called the International Clean Tech Network, which is a network of companies that are set up with a similar sort of methodology as GreenCape, that they're these triple helix organizations. And I think each of these is an opportunity to try to learn from other regions and from other entities to try and increase our focus and increase our ability and prioritization. And I think with that, I've probably spoken for far too long. A big thanks again for the LEDGPorg guys, to Scott and Anna and Charles. It really has been a fantastic experience thinking through a lot of these topics. Thanks very much, everyone.
Hey, Mike, that was very rich and by no means too long. We have a great deal of questions that I'd like to facilitate with you if you'd like to stay on for a few more minutes. I'd also like to welcome, we can take a couple more questions if you feel free to post them in the questions tab. But Mike, you know, some of these are a little disjointed, but you mentioned the launch of GreenCape by the provincial government. What's the relationship now with the provincial government? Can you characterize that a little bit better? Is there a provincial review process? You mentioned there's no mandate, but are there metrics and a specific review, a periodic review of your activities and budget?
Yeah, so absolutely. So on a very formal level, there's a Department of the Premier representative that sits on our audit committee. So the provincial government has full insight and oversight of both our activities and our finances. We are funded on an annual basis by the Department of Economic Development and Tourism. So every year we submit a business plan with specific projects and specific deliverables that we would like to achieve. We're also funded, I guess, by the Department of Agriculture and a range of other provincial government departments, which is why the audit committee representative comes from the Department of the Premier, which kind of is the overarching governance body within the regional government. But each of the programs or projects that are funded by the provincial government here in the Western Cape are funded on an annual basis based on a business plan with a specific set of deliverables that are negotiated and agreed through strategic planning sessions.
So then does a change in the political parties threaten your mission?
That's a great question, and the short answer is I'm not really sure. A lot of the work that we've done to entrench it, so that head of department's committee is now the decision-making authority for the green economy, which strictly speaking is non-political, because they're bureaucrats, they're heads of department. But I think practically it's fairly rare in government circles to see a minister change without a corresponding change in the head of department. But certainly the layers below that, the chief directors and a lot of the bureaucrats, those are the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis. So I think we're more embedded or entrenched in the system. And certainly there was a lot of anxiety about that in the most recent regional elections, which was about a year ago. But we've got until 2019 with the same set of government officials, well, assuming everything's equal, we've got until 2019 with the same set of government officials, which should, elected officials, which should allow us some leeway to be able to build out those relationships a bit further.
So then are GreenCape employees going into government?
Have we had? Okay, so we've had an interesting. We have interesting staff movements, and I guess it's testament to the type of work that we do. So, one of our staff has left to open Tesla South Africa. Another one of our staff members has left to go to the regional government in the Gauteng province to run their green economy. So we have a fairly high staff retention rate, I guess, for young staff. But the guys that are leaving for fairly amazing opportunities that are associated with the green economy, which I think is quite nice to have them in the broader network. We haven't lost anyone specifically to our provincial government, but certainly to other regions' provincial governments, yes.
I imagine with any development issues and entrepreneurial activities that corruption may arise from now and then. Do you are you often countered with navigating some of those issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so from GreenCape's perspective, we've tried to be as open and as transparent and as I guess as forthright as possible. Um, we haven't, I think, basically because we aren't decision makers in and of ourselves. The organization is typically um, not a target for corruption. All of that said, there is a lot of attempted ability by industry or by various stakeholders to get us to influence the direction of government policy. And that comes from international foreign economic representatives from a range of countries. It comes from a bunch of industry representatives, even from academics. And I think the kind of approach that we've had is to map out all of those opinions and to balance them against each other. And that a few slides back there is that practical approach where the guys that are running the programs have an obligation to go and speak to the 3 or 4 leading companies, to go and speak to the 3 or 4 leading academics, to go and speak to the 3 or 4 leading civil society um, groups. And once you've spoken to a range of people and you've got a range of opinions, I think it sort of dilutes that quite a lot. But certainly, yeah, certainly in South Africa, there is always a lot of questions about governance and corruption. I think the region that we're in, the political party is trying to distinguish itself from the current majority ruling party by being very fastidious around following rules and anti-corruption. I guess maybe it's an interesting anecdote. What it's meant on a practical basis when we work with municipalities is that there's a very high level of risk aversity from officials. Because the politicians are, or specifically in this region, are trying to take a very procedurally driven approach against corruption, it means that the ability for local decision makers, or the appetite for local decision makers to take any risk in looking at new technologies or looking at new processes is really limited. Maybe a worked example helps. So something like landfill gas flaring, which the landfill gas flaring is very easy to register as a CDM project. It is strictly a better environmental thing to do. There are 2 cities in South Africa that have landfill gas projects that are currently running. The city of Cape Town has been working on a landfill gas project for probably 6.5 years, and the reason that it's taking so long is because the legislation isn't really appropriate for landfill gas. So they won't take any risk to just go ahead and do it. They need to make sure that each of the compliance bits have been done, but it's meant that it's taken a much longer time than regions that are perhaps a little bit more flexible around not following all of the rules.
Yeah,
I'm
that
not sure if
brings
that
up
makes sense.
yeah, that brings up the importance of focus and priorities, and you gave a great description about the strength of your institution and how you could you discuss a little bit more or share a few more details about how you do this practically inside GreenCape? What specific methods or frameworks are you using to discuss and agree upon priorities?
Hmm. So there are a couple of different things, but the first step is to do all this consultation. The point of doing all of that consultation is to try to be able to end up drawing a silly 2x2 sort of Boston Consulting Group style matrix of what is the size of the impact that this intervention will have on the one axis, on the sort of the y-axis, and then on the x-axis, what is our ability to influence this? As you can imagine, it's really difficult to get an agreed opinion on where things go on a matrix like that, because both of those are very, uh, I guess, subjective measures. But when we're talking about impact from GreenCape's perspective, we're talking about things like jobs, investment numbers. When we're talking about our ability to influence it, is does the local government have the legislative power? Does the regional government have the legislative power? Does the national government have that power? What are our relationships with the specific individual that has that authority? Will it have to be a brand new relationship that you build up over time, or is there an existing track record? And each of these kind of allow you to put specific ideas onto a bit of a 2 by 2 matrix to try and see if you can figure out what is the highest impact with the most predicted ability for us to be able to succeed in doing it. And those kind of start to inform your prioritizations. There are, I guess, 2 more layers that we use for prioritization, which is the next is to try and plot those out on a bit of a timeline to make sure that you have a bit of a balance of what's a nice example? So one of the bits of work that we've started with recently is around liquefied natural gas and its participation in lowering the overall carbon emissions of the country. And really, we've taken a view that it's a transition fuel to enable a higher penetration of renewable energies. That's a position that is broadly supported by the WWF and by IRENA and a range of agencies, although it's not the best emissions trajectory. It's one that seems fairly pragmatic. If everything goes incredibly well, South Africa will have LNG power stations in something like 5 years. So for us doing a ton of work, it's a massive impact, huge numbers of investment, big numbers for carbon savings, particularly if it's displacing coal. Great stuff for grid stability, but all of those results come in 5 years' time. So while it's a huge opportunity and worth us spending some time on, it means that a bunch of the other work that we do in the energy space have to have a lot shorter time horizons so that you can have this kind of march towards consistent success over time. So a lot of maybe to fill out the rest of that energy example, most of the work that our energy team has been doing this year is around helping local authorities have specific tariffs to allow rooftop PV. So not quite the German model with feed-in tariffs or the Spanish model with 100 kilowatt farms, but sort of a little bit of a hybrid model where you make sure that you have a system that allows people to feed electricity back into the grid, but doesn't end up having a perverse incentive where you end up pushing cash from the middle class to more wealthy individuals.
That brings up a great question. I wanted to jump in about the private sector and that mechanism for engagement. Is that sort of organic, or do you have trade fairs? Is there a formal engagement of the private sector?
There's a whole range. So our guys probably see, on average, 4 companies a week,
Wow.
Maybe a little bit more, and then we
That's
have
great.
a couple of networking functions every. So most of the teams have got a target of 4 networking functions per year, and there's typically 100 or 150 companies that come to those functions. It's not those aren't hard targets. If there's an interesting topic, so some of the rules are changing with the utility scale renewable energy program, and we will have 2 networking functions within the space of a week, and you'll have 100 companies at each of those. And then you might go with nothing for the next 6 months because nothing has really changed or nothing's really interesting.
So you provide a bit of matchmaking as well, I imagine.
Yeah, so lots of matchmaking, lots of networking. That kind of industrial development or company-specific development is quite a large part of what we do, and also it's quite a large part of trying to understand where the opportunities are.
Great. So you had mentioned before the importance of the board and the steering committees, the stakeholders, the surveys. How do you keep them engaged? What incentives do they have to commit themselves to this effort?
Um, Nothing really. Well, we give them lunches. Is the first one. But yeah, so our board of directors has been voluntary and unpaid, um, right up until about a few months ago, where we started to do basically they get a stipend to cover travel costs and things like that. Um, but largely they've been completely voluntary, and the same thing with the steering committees. And you're spot on. Like the it's hard to get guys to come to the first one, um, but oh, hello,
Yes.
is everyone still there? It's hard to get people to come to the first steering committee or the first one of those things, but I think very quickly they get quite engaged by the competence of the team and by the really specifically targeted nature of the work that we're doing. I think that adds quite a lot of credibility quite fast, that people can see the direct causal relationship between what we say we're trying to achieve and the specific tasks that we're doing. And I think that gets particularly business guys and academics quite a lot more interested in participating. And the academics, we turn up research topics for PhD students or for master's students on an incredibly frequent basis. So we're trying to formalize that a little bit on how we pass those opportunities on to academics, but it helps them build a bunch of relevance as well.
Well, Mike, you're a champion, and I really want to congratulate you on this effort. It's impressive, it's inspiring. I think that this clearly has a lot of potential for replication, surely in other provinces in South Africa, but outside as well. And we really appreciate you taking the time to share this information, to compile this information, and it's quite valuable from our perspective. So thank you for taking that time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Okay, everyone, we're going to, this presentation will be posted at the LEDGPorg site very soon. If you could please take the opportunity to answer some of these quick questions for us so that we can do this better next time. We appreciate it. Okay, and that concludes our webinar. Again, Mike, to the entire staff at GreenCape, thank you for doing this, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Goodbye.